How did I start a bakery with only a couple $1,000s? So I'm going to talk you through how you could do the same thing with less than $1,000 and help limit your risk, at least during startup, to see if your idea pans out. So a couple of things you want to know is, what will you be selling? Will it be cookies, pastries, cakes, bread, pies, brownies, fudge, whatever that might be? Where will you plan to sell them? I would say a place that's good to get started is generally find your local farmer's market, see how it works out. I would give out free samples if I'm going to do that, to at least get people to taste the product. When people taste a product, I don't know if it's they feel guilty or they at least know they like it, but they have a lot more sales if you give out some samples. So that's why they do it. Also, farmers markets will give you a good amount of foot traffic. So make sure you pick a farmers market that's fairly busy and get there early so you can pick where you're going to go and set up. So pick more central so that you get a lot more foot traffic. Be aware that if you do go to a farmer's market, it is very weather and time of the year dependent. So if it's going to be a rainy, cold, dreary day, or it's snowing or something like that, there's going to be a lot less people that want to walk around, especially outside. So if you have indoor venue and an outdoor venue and it's inclement weather, indoor is going to do better than outdoor because people don't want to stand in the rain. Also, when you're at the farmer's market, make sure you have some business cards. Just print out some business cards with your name and phone number and a way to get a hold of you. You might want to sell to stores, restaurants, maybe online or phone. Now, different states will have different rules with these, and I'll give you some links in the description below. Basically, it's going to give you the rules and regulations of each state so that you can look through it. The other question is, where are you going to actually bake these? So I tend to go with existing licensed commercial kitchens. You can rent these by the month, which is a bit expensive, or you can rent them for a couple hours or a day a week or something along those lines. So what I did is I negotiated an existing commercial kitchen that I would bake Friday night, and then I would go to the farmers markets on Saturday and Sunday, and I would just do that after work with one of my friends. You can bake goods at home, but there are different cottage laws depending on the state you live. Most likely, you're going to have in the area that you're prepping food, no pets, no kids allowed. Generally, it needs to be a separate space. That space will need an inspection. They're going to make sure that you have the right water temperature, so when you're cleaning things, you can do that. If you don't use public water, they need to test the water. They're going to want a 3-sink basin, so effectively you have your soapy water, and quaternary ammonium so that you can wash things in there. And then you need a separate hand sink. That's generally what the basic requirements are, just to give you an idea of what you're going to need. You also want to take a course. It's food handlers or food safety certification. This is generally about $10 per person. It lasts for about 5 years. It's not really that big of a deal. It's online. They're pretty straightforward. But it's useful in knowing how to store food so you don't get people sick. Now, if you're going with a kitchen that is not an existing licensed commercial kitchen, you're going to have to contact the State Department of Agriculture, register your business plan with them. You're going to go through your local code enforcement and zoning, basically to make sure everything's good to go. I prefer use the existing kitchen. You get rid of some of these issues right off the bat. And there's a link in the description below that actually, for every state in the U.S., gives you a list of commercial kitchens that are available that could be rented by the hour, by the day, or month, or so forth. And the benefit to that is you're not putting $60,000 into a facility for something you don't know if it's going to work or not. So again, I want to limit my risk. I don't want to put out tens of thousands of dollars for equipment that a few months later I might not need at all. So this way I get a quick read on, do people like my product? And if there's an overwhelming, positive return and people are giving me money and making good money, then I might take some of that money and start reinvesting it into the business. Other ideas that you can use for existing licensed kitchens, generally you'll have schools, churches, temples, mosques, things like that. They'll have a kitchen and it generally will be licensed. Just check, make sure it's up to date, and you might be able to pay whatever that may be, some money, which helps them, and it gives you the opportunity to try out an idea without spending a lot of money on it. You are going to have packaging and labeling requirements generally that you can look through the FDA. So I have the FDA requirements for nutritional labels in the description below as well. Generally, the biggest one is you need to list all your allergens, the business address, business name, all the ingredients you've used, the net amount, and the product name. And as you get bigger in terms of business, there's going to be more nutritional facts that are going to be needed. Basically, I did that by adding up all the, if I'm looking at fat, I looked up all the fat for every single thing that I put in, and then I divided it by the number of units that come out of whatever that batch is, and I did that for, calories, fat, sugars, all of those things. There's other ways to do it as well. You can have testing. For packaging, I'll put a link to here as well. I'm not affiliated in any way with these, but I really liked Webstront store. You can get cardboard boxes for like 10 cents a box. I can also get labels, and the labels might be a couple of pennies. And I also want that label to use as basically advertisement for the business with the logo, the name, and all of these requirements. But it's also used to seal the box. It's a secondary use is that if anybody tampered with it. It's a tamper-evident seal effectively. So for labels, I've used Avery. You can buy them off at Webstront. Rock, paper, scissors used to have really cheap labels. It looks like now they just give you sheets and now you have to cut them, so I don't know if I would do that again. And there's online labels. I'd probably go with these at this point or go through Webstront store. The other thing you want to think about is you always want to limit your risk. I never want to do something that could make me lose everything I have. The more you have, the more you want to protect it. So I would recommend getting insurance. You can get public or what's called general liability insurance. So this is more of if somebody slips, trips, falls, anything happens like that, and they sue you, you can get coverage for that. Usually I cover about $1 to $2 million of liability coverage. And then there's also the other thing, especially if you're selling food, you need product insurance. Product insurance differs from public or general liability insurance in that if someone eats something and they have an allergic reaction, there's a piece of metal in it, you shouldn't have that in the first place, but if anything like that happens and you get sued, the insurance company would give you some level of protection for the product insurance or product liability as well. And again, I carry $1 to $2 million. And then just to think about that, if I have $1 million of coverage, I'm looking at somewhere probably in the $30 to $100 a month. So it's not as expensive as you think it is. And if something happens, you're going to want to have this. And if you're dealing with the general population of the public, people sue people all the time, so it's better to have it than not. If you want to, you can also form an LLC. That's going to cost a couple $100 to file all the paperwork with your state. Generally starting out, just getting insurance is good enough for me. If you're making a lot of money or you have a lot to protect in terms of your assets, limited liability corporation or an LLC will also protect you in most instances. How much does everything cost? Well, you have variable costs and you have fixed costs. Your variable cost is going to include actually a lot. It goes in from the packaging and the labeling are some of the biggest inputs here. And then the ingredients, and then if you have to pay somebody, basically the labor of the time. If you're doing it yourself, you're getting paid out of whatever the profit is at the end. If it's fixed, you're looking at the rent, so you may have anywhere around $150 a day to rent the facility. Insurance might be about $50 a month. Farmers market, when you get a stand, I've seen most of these be around $40 to $50 to have a stand on a Saturday or a Sunday. Price. So how do you set your price? Well, one, I always want to have at least 2 times whatever my inputs are. But see what the competition is. What do people pay? What are people willing to pay? You can always start a bit higher, see what people are willing to pay. And maybe I sell a dozen for $6 and I sell 2 dozen for $10 and something like that to incentivize people to buy more, and I'll give them a discount as they buy more. And by the way, a dozen cookies. If it's like a sugar cookie, at the time I was doing this, it was like $1 for all of my inputs, and I would sell them for like $6. Chocolate chip were the most expensive. They might have been $1.50 for a dozen for inputs. A word of caution: when you scale things up, they're not always the same. And what I mean by this is when you're working in your own oven, you're going to probably use a conventional oven. When you move to making 60 dozen cookies at a single time, I was baking over about 120 plus dozen cookies, thousands of cookies a night. You have convection ovens, which use a fan. You're going to have to lower generally the time more so than the temperature in order to cook it. But it's going to be some combination of, you're going to have a lower time and temperature just because the fan is blowing the hot air around, so it cooks much quicker. Also, be aware that when you're mixing with a little hand mixer, you have a certain tip speed of the agitator or the blades, and that's not going to have as much shear stress. When you move up to a larger planetary mixing, like maybe you're using 20-quart mixers or something like that, the bigger blade moving at relatively low speed is going to have a lot more shear, and that shear is going to break up chocolate chips and things like that, so you might want to add fragile components very late in the mixing process so it's not all broken up. So if you take chocolate chips and you throw them in a bit early, it's just going to turn all the dough from the normal dough color to very brown, and it might be less appealing depending on what you're trying to make. Now if you're making double chocolate chip and it's chocolate dough or like a fudge dough, then it doesn't matter. But if it's if there's some differences in that, just be aware of it. That's probably the problem. The other thing that's really handy, especially to get cookies and other baked goods off, I love parchment paper. This really speeds up the process. You don't have as much burning. You don't have to deal with greasing anything, and cookies and everything slide off. You don't really even need a spatula at that point. I mean, you do to put it in the box, but they just slide off. So it's also reusable, and I would use it through the night. The other thing I want to avoid, I don't want to use glass pretty much anything. Just imagine you have this large moving blade and I'm pouring eggs or whatever out of a cup. That cup should not be a glass cup, because if I drop that cup, it's going to shatter. And if that shatters, now I have glass shards and everything, and now I have to throw out the entire batch, clean everything, and then start all over, and that costs a lot of money and time. So if I have plastic or metal and I drop something, it's going to bang and bounce and it's not going to break. So I tend to go with plastic and metal instead of glass anything, especially as I scale up. So I hope you find this actionable and useful. I cover a lot of financial topics, such as how to start businesses, how to make more money, how to save, how to invest, how to save on taxes. So if any of these interest you, please subscribe and have a great day.